So this is the animation we're going to create in this video. For this one, all you need is a simple fusion composition. And you can just drag this composition right here and make sure the timeline that you create is in a vertical resolution. So what you can do is just go to timeline, create new timeline, use project settings, and then go over to format and just click on use vertical resolution. So that's how you will get this vertical timeline. Now, right click on your Fusion composition, go over to the Fusion page. Let's drag in a text 3D right here. And you can connect this with a merge 3D. And while you have your merge 3D selected, press Control Space and search for render 3D. Make sure this is connected and then connect this with the media out. All right, so go over to your text 3D and over here you can just type in anything you want. And the font that I'm using is Montserrat at Bold. Right, so let's go over to transform and from here change the x to keep the x at 0, change the y to 2 and the z to minus 15. Now the rotation x, change this to 7.5, y to minus 20 and z to keep this at 0. Now let's go over back to the text and from here, first of all, let's go over to 10 frames and then go over to right on, create a keyframe over here, then go over to 0 and change this to 0. Now go over at 20 and in the shading, create a keyframe for opacity and then at 0, change the opacity to 0. So this is how it will look. And then we're going to fade this out from 65 frames. So you can just create a keyframe at opacity again. And then at 70, change this to 0 again. Now let's add in a shape over here. And for this shape, first of all, unselect this lock, width, and height, and let's also connect this to the merge. So for this one, let's go over at 25, create a keyframe at width, and then also at 40, create another keyframe at width. Now the one at 40 frames, let's change this to 6.85, and the one at 25, let's change this to 0. Now the height for this is going to be 0.94. So as you can see, this is how it looks at the moment, but you need to go over to transform and change some settings from here. So let's go over and change the Y from 0 to 1.3 and the Z, let's change this to minus 15. Let's go over at X, change this to 7.5. The Y, let's change this to minus 20 and Z 0.7. So this is how it will look. Now let's go over to material and from here we're going to change the color to red. Just change the green and blue to 0 and the red to 0.6 or something like this. Now let's drag in another text 3D and let's type in this text and Montserrat bold. Once again, I'm using the same Montserrat bold, but this time the color will be at black. So let's connect this to the merge 3D. And now let's go over to transform and change the translation to keep the x at 0 and change the y to 1.14 and z to minus 15. Change the x to of the rotation to 7.5, y to minus 20 and z keep this at 0.6. All right. So this is how it looks. All right. And for the text 3D2, go back to the text over here and change this to 0.76. You need to go back to the shape and change this Z to 16. So now you will see the text will appear. And let's go back to the text 3D node and let's position the Y and Z a little bit. So this looks fine. And let's also position this Y again a little bit more. So let's move the text up again as well. So you will have to manually adjust this and this looks fine now. And make sure that the size is also at 0.76. If you want to increase this, you can. So I'll just go with 0.8. This works for me. Okay, so now for the animations for this text 3D2, let's go over at 45 and create a keyframe at right on, and over here change this to 0. Now go over at 50 and change this back to 1. Now let's go over to shading, and from here let's go over at 50, create a keyframe at opacity, and then go over at 45, change this to 0, then go over at 55 and create a keyframe. So basically, let's just go over at 50 and just unselect this keyframe. So this is from 45 to 55, and then go over at 65, create a keyframe, keep this at 1, and then at 70, change this back to 0. So this is how it will look. Right, and we're going to do the same for this shape as well. So you can go over at 65 and then go over at this material at opacity, create a keyframe at opacity at 65 frames, and then at 70, let's change this to 0. All right, now let's add in our text 3D tree and connect this with the merge. And let's type in return. You can of course write anything you want. So Montserrat is the font for this one as well, but this time we're going to go with semi-bold. And let's change this to red. Now let's go over at transform, and from here let's keep the X and Y at 0, but change the Z to 40. So for this one, we don't need any animations, but now we need to add some particles. So you can add this P emitter and then make sure you also click on this P renderer. So this is connected, and then connect the P renderer to merge 3D. Now go over to the P emitter, and from here, let's go over to number, change this to 0.8, and everything else, just keep this as it is. Now let's go over to set, change the style to blob, and let's go over to the size controls, change the size to 0.2 and keep everything else at 0. Now let's go over at region and change this to 20. Change the temporal distribution to randomly distributed. All right, now we need to add in a transform 3D. So let's move this right here. Click on your merge 3D and search for, by pressing Control space, search for transform 3D. So here we will have this transform 3D node. And now let's go over to 0, create a keyframe at Z. So create a keyframe at this translation Z at 0 frames, then go over to 20 frames and change this to -1, then go over to 30 frames and then change this to -5. Now at 60, change this to -7, and then at 70, let's change this to -47. And then finally at the end, let's change this to -50. So now you will see exactly what happened. So if you play this is how it looks. Now that we have this done, we also need to add a line for this text over here. What you can do is just go ahead and add in another shape 3D. Sorry, you need to add shape 3D and then connect this with the merge 3D. And for this shape 3D, just keep this at plane, unselect the lock width and height, and then go over to 90. Create a keyframe at width and change this to 0. Keep the height at 0.05, and then let's go over to 105 and change the width to 3.5. All right, now let's go over to transform. And first of all, let's also change this to red in material and then go over to transform. And from here, you can change the Y to -0.1 and Z to 40, and then X in the rotation to 5. Keep the Y at 0, and then the Z, keep this at 0 as well. So here you will see this is the line. Now for this one, let's make sure you select this shape 3D, press Control space and search for displays 3D, and also connect this fast noise to this displays 3D. Now in the fast noise, just change the detail to 10 and the scale to 20, and also change the contrast to 0.3. So this is how it looks, and also make sure you click this discontinuous so that you will get this marker sort of line effect. Now for the final steps, let's click on render 3D, press Control Space, search for zoom blur, and once again press zoom blur and click Control Space and search for glow. So in the zoom blur, I'm going to change this at minus 0.5, and then at glow, I'm going to change this glow size to 70 and the glow to 0.7. So here you will see we have a nice looking glow effect for all of the animation. So now you can go back to the main timeline and see how this looks. So as a final step, what I did was I also added this vintage texture, and this is available in DaVinci Resolve. Just go over to generators, and from here you can just select this vintage texture, add this right here. But go over to settings and change the composite mode to add, and you can just change the opacity to whatever you want. I'm just keeping this at 30. Then in the generators, make sure you also change the texture angle to 90 so that this fits in the vertical screen. So if we play this now, this is how it looks. So this was it for this video. I hope you found this video useful, and I will see you in the next one.